The U.S. economy added 209,000 new jobs and unemployment dipped to 3.6% in June. This is according to new Labor Department data released just this morning. That's the slowest month of job growth since December 2020. Nonetheless, President Biden took to Twitter to boast. Quote, "Today we learned over 200,000 jobs were created last month, bringing our total to 13.2 million jobs created since I took office." Unemployment remained below 4%. Working age Americans with jobs is at a 20-year high, and inflation is down by more than half. This is Bidenomics.
Over on Fox News, commentators poured cold water on the White House's celebration. Let's watch.
So you are seeing some signs of cooling in the labor market, and that's important because the president's going to get out today and tout his 12 million, 13 million jobs. I got to tell you, that's not telling the whole story right now. A lot of that is filling in from the pandemic. The real job gains have been much more modest than that. In fact, by some measures, we're still 1 million to 2 million jobs below where we should be right now because so many people are sitting on the sidelines. They're not participating in the economy.
So I think what he says there is not entirely wrong. I think there are a lot of jobs that unemployment doesn't count, just on the basic fact that the metric is, okay, who's been looking for jobs in the past 4 weeks and is available for work. There are a lot of people who would like to have a job who have given up on looking because they've been looking for so long. Those folks are never counted. But I think the way he says, if we were on track, we would have about 1 to 2 million more jobs. And what we're seeing is recovery from job loss during the pandemic. Okay, maybe that's true. But I think anyone can say anytime, as long as we have unemployment, those positions should be filled. Everyone should have a job who wants one. Having a certain level of the population unemployed is unnecessary. I'm not sure how he got that metric, though, because I don't think he agrees with me on that, because if he did, it would be over 6 million jobs that he said. So I think a lot of Fox News commentators are so close to getting the point, but maybe not. I have no idea what calculation he made to say we should have 1 to 2 million more jobs, other than it would be nice if 1 to 2 more million people were employed.
I think his point about the post-pandemic recovery is important, because if you have a situation where essentially the entire economy is shut down and then those jobs eventually return, I don't think you can use the term created in response to those jobs the way that the Biden administration does. To me, that seems kind of manipulative and dishonest. And this latest jobs report is not good news. This is a slowing of the economy after years of inflation, and we're still seeing real wages decline for most Americans. We're seeing that the middle class has had lower average real incomes, and so that's not a success. That's not a victory. A lot of people are still struggling to pay for basic necessities. A lot of people are struggling to pay for energy costs. And so it's just kind of bizarre to me that the Biden administration has not only touted this particular jobs report as a success, but also that they're running on Bidenomics. I would think that when you have polls saying that only about 25% of Americans support your handling of the economy, or that only about a quarter of Americans trust you to handle the economy, that you would be running as far away from that issue as possible. And yet they seem to think that this is a victory lap for them.
It's so strange to me that we're getting two completely different messages from the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, who the Biden administration didn't appoint but could have replaced. He was an appointment from the Trump administration. But their explicit intent right now is to actually put more people out of a job, because their working theory is that that will quell inflation. We are seeing job growth and inflation steadying because that policy solution wasn't relevant to the type of inflation we were experiencing. It was not demand-driven inflation, which suggests that hiking interest rates wasn't going to resolve it. That's beside the point. When you have the Federal Reserve explicitly saying that it would be good for the economy if we increased unemployment to cool the labor market a bit, but then you have the White House and the Biden administration saying, we have this great job growth, and that's Bidenomics. Those two things can't be true in the same economic reality. And both are messages coming out of this administration that makes absolutely no sense. It seems to me that the only consistency here is if they tell people, okay, we're experiencing job growth, we're doing good things, we're improving the economy, this is all good. And you have the Federal Reserve say, well, inflation's cooling, this is all good as well. there's a truth here that is the administration's totally okay with having people who are unemployed be the sacrificial lambs to bring inflation down is their message. But what they really want to do is make the labor market so that people will have consistently low wages. We've seen wages remain stagnant relative to inflation since about the 1970s. They want those wages to stay low so profit margins can stay high, and they can still tell this message that we're working really hard to make the economy good for people when we're seeing record numbers of people who are living paycheck to paycheck in the United States. That tells you the economic reality, not these statistics that they try to convince us are economic reality.
Yeah, I agree. It is weird for all of the messaging to be coming from the perspective that the labor market is too good for workers, that people don't want to work, apparently. That's a claim that we hear a lot, but the reality is that they don't want to work in jobs that don't pay them enough to do the work. And so to hear those messages about the labor market being too hot, while we also hear that real wages are down for Americans, those two things just don't seem to go together. And then also the claim that inflation has fallen since the past year. Well, okay, but it's still higher than it was when Biden first took office. So there seems to be a lot of clever accounting going on here. It almost reminds me of when the Biden administration suddenly found an extra $10 billion when they were sending weapons to Ukraine. I don't feel like we're getting the full story either.
Yeah, and Biden economics, by their definition, is kind of the opposite of trickle-down economics. They want to counter that kind of messaging of Reaganomics. And that's not really what we have here. That's not really the approach the Biden administration has taken. He's said explicitly Bidenomics is investing in the working and middle class, and that we can grow and improve upon the economy by investing in working and middle class people. Is that what the Biden administration is doing? No, people are worse off right now than they have been. And so by saying it's Bidenomics to see this job growth, I don't think that's Bidenomics by their definition of Bidenomics. And then you have folks like the Fox News commentators pointing out that if we were increasing our productive capacity on the same trajectory we were before the pandemic, perhaps we would have seen more job growth. That might, if that were true and shown in the data, make the case that the interest rates are actually putting more people out of a job. The interest rate increases. Is that the case? I'm not sure the Federal Reserve would say that. I think there's a lot of people that are still not being counted that lost their jobs during the pandemic and have lost hope at looking for a new one. I think they're just not telling the full story here. And if they wanted to do Bidenomics, it needs to be very clear to working and middle class people that the administration is investing in them. And I think they feel very viscerally that that's not the case.
Yeah, and to your point about Bidenomics supposedly being about working from the ground up, for giving more agency to working class Americans, we see in this jobs report that most of the jobs growth was in government jobs, 60,000 jobs added there. The next few categories are healthcare, social assistance, and then finally you get to construction at 23,000 jobs added. But then you keep going down and you get professional and business services. So it's really odd if most of the jobs are coming from government growth as opposed to private sector work. I don't really see how that's a huge victory for working and middle class individuals.
Yeah, and what are the nature of the jobs? That's a story that they don't like to tell. And it's because we've outsourced the job of job creation to private banks. That's a task that doesn't need to be outsourced, but we've just given the entire purview to private banks to say, who do you think deserves a loan or an investment to start a business? Who gets to grow their business? What are the nature of those businesses? They usually make that decision in the direction of what's the highest return on investment. Wall Street's also motivated by investing on that same premise. What does that leave us? An economy where there are a lot of gaps in the market for things people really want and value, but are not profitable to create. When we have crumbling infrastructure and crumbling roads, our schools are not nearly as good as they used to be. When we have elderly people not able to receive care because it's either prohibitively expensive or not available to them, there are all kinds of gaps in the market that actually, if we wanted a functioning economy, Congress would use their power of the purse like they did in the post-war era under FDR and say, okay, We actually need some good paying public jobs that address the gaps in the market. And those jobs don't need to be done by publicly run programs. They can be done by private contractors if you want to take that route. But the government and Congress have an obligation to do something to address the gaps in the market. They cannot pretend that the private sector is doing an efficient job of running the economy. They cannot pretend that they don't actually have a role in determining the outcomes in the economy. They absolutely do. And they're doing the irresponsible thing by ignoring that reality and just saying like, oh, we've done a lot and now people have more jobs than they used to and things are going quite well.
We're going to take a quick break and be back with more Rising after this.